Hello, welcome to this video. If this is your first time seeing my channel, I highly recommend you go check out my other videos that are highly related to OSCP and other InfoSec certifications such as the CRTP, and in the future there will also be some other offset courses as well. Anything I do I'll upload. Just at the minute it's heavily focused on the OSCP and sort of the entry level InfoSec things such as privilege escalation, and now we're delving deep into the Kerberos protocol. So for the type of people watching this video, what you're going to get out of it, if you're already an advanced sort of, I don't know, individual with a lot of experience for a sysadmin, this video is probably going to be a little refresher for yourself. It's not going to be probably anything new. If you're getting into InfoSec, this is designed for you, people taking the OSCP and the CRTP, things like that. This video is really going to help you, especially people taking the CRTP where you need a really solid understanding of Active Directory. And this is going to really help you with that. Again, for the OSCP, at least in my instance, if you can sort of understand and get to grips with a lot of the stuff covered in this video, you are going to have a good time. I was really worried about the AD set and Active in the OSCP. And then actually coming into it, didn't have too many issues. It took me a while, but finally passed the exam. Wasn't related to Active Directory though. The skill set and the developed understanding was there. It was just more of an issue with other things, as I explained in my actual video. Anyway, back onto the actual content of this. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going over the Kerberos protocol, how it came about, what it is, the common attacks that you're going to use. And this is going to be from the perspective of people taking the OSCP in general and the CRTP. So there's going to be common attack paths discovered in discussed in this video. I'll tell you what's in scope for what exams and what isn't. So for instance, there'll be some stuff a bit more advanced that's not going to be in scope for OSCP. It's still heavily relevant. Obviously, if you're going to become a penetration tester, you're going to still need to know this, and it's going to be something that you're going to need to pick up, especially for your exams like CRTP, things like that, that are a bit more advanced. You're always going to need to know these techniques. So right away, what actually is Kerberos? So Kerberos is just a network authentication protocol. It's built into Active Directory and other things as well. It's not Active Directory, it is its own sort of entity. It's a network authentication protocol originally developed by MIT in 1988, so it's built by uni grads, and this was to sort of switch out the whole password sharing thing. They wanted to make it a centralized authentication system, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and we'll touch on there. It utilizes tickets to actually do this, and the centralized system also reduces the complexity and improves overall security. Again, we're going to discuss this more and explain it as time goes on, but generally the sort of main concepts behind Kerberos is sort of to limit the transfer of credentials, use a centralized system, and it reduces complexity. Obviously, it is a complex system since it's developed, since its inception. It's like anything, it starts like relatively small and it gets a lot more complex as it is now. It's a big beast. But at its core, and when it was initially developed, it's a very sort of simple concept, and it's just built off from there, and it's built very well. Obviously, like anything, there are attack vectors to it and vulnerabilities, which we are going to discuss. So it says there, it was built and to protect services provided by Project Athena, which is a thing that still exists at MIT now. You can go look at that more if you wish. Look online. I'm not going to talk too much about that in this video. It's pretty much going to be the end of it, but that's why it was actually made. So a basic authentication overview of Kerberos. There's also going to be diagrams to go along with this, and where I can, I'll find some clips to actually help explain this sort of thing. So the user credentials are stored on a centralized system known as the KDC, the Key Distribution Center. The KDC is the domain controller, or generally it will be on the domain controller. That's the heart of your domain, and you can have multiple. And again, in every system, I'm just specifying this. It's not that it's get overly complex, but there can be multiple KDCs, multiple DCs, things like that. But this centralized part of the system is the only part that has access to the user private keys. So what that means is, instead of relying on a username and password being transferred every time, once one request has been made and the user has been verified based on the credentials stored at the KDC, that user is then authenticated, and it will then use tickets to keep that up. Obviously, on a time frame as well, so there's a timestamp to these tickets that don't just last forever. Some do. We'll talk about that that a bit in the video as well. But it reduces the need for you to constantly send your credentials across the net. So it's a pretty good way of doing it. As I've already explained, it utilizes tickets to reduce the need for transfer of credentials across the network, primarily using the ticket granting service TGS ticket and the ticket granting ticket. There are multiple types of ticket. These are the two that you're generally going to see. At a very simple level, a ticket granting ticket request is made, a ticket granting ticket is returned, and then when you want to access something on the network, a machine, a service, whatever it may be, you will then request a ticket granting service ticket and send that to a given service. So in general, the basic authentication process relies on three key components: the user wishing to access the service at which you want to access, and the KDC, the key distribution center. So just to reiterate, your credentials are stored on a domain controller, as in the KDC, in an Active Directory environment. So that's why your DC is so powerful. As we know from our previous learning for the OSCP, the credentials are stored in your ntds.dit file, and that is where all information or credentials for the domain are stored in that file. So generally, a lot of attacks will, if you've got things like a backup privilege or some sort of thing you can access files, you'll try and copy that file, extract it out along with your system file, and then you'll be able to read the hashed passwords and be able to crack them, things like that. So the ticket system, and it's invented to reduce the need for credentials. It's to prevent forging. All tickets are encrypted using the KDC private key and the user's private keys respectively. So again, more of a security thing. If they just sent a ticket and was like, oh, X, Y, and Z, it is what it is. It can be manipulated, like a man-in-the-middle attack. Again, tickets are still vulnerable to that, but they're encrypted, so it's going to make things a lot more difficult. And that is using the KDC's private key. Only the KDC is going to know. That's not shared across the domain. That's the only place where that private key is kept. So there's only one way these tickets can be forged, or certain tickets can be forged, and that is via compromise of that key, whether it be the accessing the domain controller directly, or for whatever reason the key is leaked somehow. We'll discuss more about this later on as well. It's just a general overview at the minute. So it's a stateless protocol, so it relies on authenticators to verify information authenticity via correctly decrypting data. And these authenticators are time sensitive due to authenticators being timestamps. So basically, the tickets have lifetimes, and the authenticators that you're going to use to basically validate these tickets are all based on timestamps. Kerberos is heavily reliant on your time. So if you perform a scan on a domain controller, you'll see a port open. I believe it is 123, and that is a timing service port. I probably butchered that, but basically the reason why that exists is because Kerberos has to be synced with the correct time, and if it's not, you will get an error. So if you've ever been pen testing or you've been working on a domain and you'll have some sort of error that'll basically just say, oh, the time's out of sync. That is why, because this ticket system that it uses is heavily reliant on system time. So if your system time's out of whack, or likewise DC system time's incorrect, you're not going to be able to authenticate correctly. So continuing on, how authentication is actually made in the Kerberos protocol. The user sends a request to the KDC with their username and the authenticator, which we just discussed. The authenticator is the current timestamp encrypted via the user's secret key. The reason why this is encrypted by the user's secret key is, as we just mentioned, the only thing that knows the private key of the KDC is the KDC itself. If that ever got leaked, it would cause full domain compromise. So to prevent that, it uses something that both parties are going to know. The correct user's key will always decrypt that. So if we provide an incorrect password and it encrypts that timestamp with the incorrect password, the KDC is not going to be able to decrypt it with the real password of the user's account. As well, the reason why these timestamps are so, as I just mentioned, are so important is, let's say if your time's in the future or in the past, for whatever reason, it was 1970, obviously the domains, the DC's in current time, or what, even if it's just out of whack slightly, it's going to give you an error, because when it checks that timestamp to check the validity of the ticket, even if it can decrypt it, it's going to see, oh, it's let's say it's in the future, and it's not going to know what to do with that, so it's just going to invalidate it. It's going to be like, oh, the time, it will give you a timing error as well. It'll say, oh, it's incorrect time, and it will give you that kind of error, but that's why it does that. As Kerberos stores the user's secret on the KDC, if the secret key provided by the user is invalid, the timestamp cannot be decrypted, resulting in failed authentication. Incorrect time synchronization can also cause no authentication, as I've just explained there. Similar to how SSL works, if your timing is messed up, you're able to access any online service using SSL. It's similar to that. So here is a diagram of the authentication service, the AS-REQ request, which is sent. So this is the initial request that is sent when someone wants to just access a Kerberos protocol, where they will send their credentials. This is the first time the credentials are sent, and hopefully it will be the only time during this lifetime that it has to be sent as well. As it says, it's a stateless protocol, so it's just going to limit the amount of times that you have to do this. So unless there's some really strict policies in place, so every time you access a service or things like that, you've got to re-enter your credentials. As long as you can access these things, this should be the only time you have to submit your credentials across the network. So the AS-REQ request, as you can see there's the username of the user. That remains unencrypted. There's nothing sensitive about that. It is what it is. The authenticated timestamp, that's encrypted by the user's secret key. And as I already explained, if the secret key of the user provided is valid, then that will be successfully decrypted. And then once that is decrypted, Kerberos will basically say, oh, is this timestamp correct? Is it within a certain frame? If it's not, it will then be like, oh, whatever. If it's incorrect, it'll say authentication failure. Or if the time's out of whack, it'll say the time's incorrect. And the response received from the AS-REQ request is the AS-REP request. We're going to discuss an attack using these requests as well, which we'll discuss later, but I'm just going to mention it now. So, sent back in the AS-REP response is the session key. It's encrypted by the user's secret. And then we have a TGT, a ticket granting ticket, which is encrypted via the KDC. So the only thing that can decrypt and access the data stored in the TGT is the domain controller. Or if we were to somehow get the copy of the KRB TGT account, the KDC's private key would be able to create forged tickets and manipulate the data stored in that TGT. Now, the data stored in there is relating to your user account rights. So basically, all your information about your account that the domain has will be stored inside of this TGT. As well, inside of the TGT is also a copy of the session key. That's going to become apparent why later, because when new tickets are sent, a new session key is created, and a copy of the old session key is always present in the TGT, so it can always verify like what sessions, what things like that. Continuing on from the initial request, if successful, the AS-REQ response is returned with a valid TGT, a ticket granting ticket. The whole process is known as pre-authentication. It can be disabled globally or via a user-specific basis in Active Directory. This leads to attacks such as AS-REQ roasting. As Kerberos is stateless, no session keys information is stored. This is where the session keys in the ticket come in. As I just touched on there, Kerberos is a stateless protocol, meaning none of this information's stored in the KDC on anything like that. It just sort of exists. This exists on the fly. So it creates a copy of these session keys in the TGT, and it will replace that copy with another one when another session key comes in, things like that. So if you've been doing your research on your Kerberos attacks, you might have heard of AS-REQ roasting. We'll discuss that later on in this video. Just a little quick introduction to it. Basically, pre-authentication, it means that you send, you can basically just send a valid username, and it will always return an AS-REQ response from a valid username. It doesn't require authentication. Now, what's bad about that is that this session key is encrypted via the user's secret key. So if you were to successfully decrypt that, you've essentially gained the user's secret key, the user's password. So if you don't have to authenticate and you always get essentially a copy of something that can be cracked, you can offline crack this using something like John the Ripper or Hashcat or other tools, things like that. And if the password's weak enough, you'll be able to get a plaintext password from it. If not, you'll at least be able to get the hash of the password, things like that, which is never good because, again, it can lead to other attacks as well. So, ticket session keys. Ticket session keys verify authenticity via decrypting authenticators on each request. A session key is generated at the start of a request chain. A copy of the session key is stored inside of a TGT, which is only ever encrypted via the KDC. And what that means is it can only ever be encrypted and decrypted via the domain controller. No one else can access any information stored in that TGT. If an authenticator cannot be decrypted by a session key, it indicates that something has gone wrong and the request is invalid. So these session keys basically exist to keep track of the sessions in the request lifecycle. So if for whatever reason a previous session key cannot be decrypted, basically means something's gone wrong. Something somewhere is just incorrect, and yeah, Kerberos isn't going to like it, and it's just going to make you re-authenticate and start this process again. So a ticket granting ticket, looking at this a bit more in depth. So when we've successfully authenticated to Kerberos and we've been given a TGT, which will allow us to request TGS ticket granting service ticket so we can access a specific service, there's a few things that are contained within the TGT, which are of note to us. So there is a copy of the session key and the ticket data. We'll explain this even more a bit later as well. It's not just a big chunk of data, there's a name for it and other things as well, but I'm going to keep it pretty simple for the minute. So there's a copy of the session key that we've previously got from our AS-REQ request, and the TGT is encrypted via the KDC secret key. So all of this data is inaccessible to everyone other than the domain controller. No one else can decrypt it. I know I keep going over it, but I just want to reiterate that the TGT cannot be decrypted by anything but the domain controller, and it stores essential ticket data such as user. If the user's an admin, a domain admin, what machines, what services can the user access, things like that. This is why this ticket is so valuable. So if you were able to forge these tickets, you'd be able to perform an attack that is known as a golden ticket, and that will basically mean that you can forge, you've somehow got an access to the KRB TGT or the private key of the KDC as we know it, and you've been able to manipulate and forge this data, so you can basically become a domain admin. Following on, the ticket granting ticket contains user information such as available privileges and service access, as well as account information and properties, all secured via encryption from the KDC secret key. It also contains a copy of the session key, which will be used for session validity checks on tickets. It's a time-sensitive period, time-stamped tickets, so these tickets have a lifespan. If the request takes too long, another ticket must be generated. This also prevents attacks such as if you go into a system and a ticket's there. If these tickets just have an infinite lifetime, anyone that's ever logged onto a machine, you'll be able to just take these tickets and recycle them, basically. This sort of aims to prevent that. But again, like anything, there's always ways around it. It's used to request TGS ticket granting service tickets. So, as I've already explained a few times, the essential life cycle of it, you will request a ticket granting ticket, and then you will request a TGS ticket once you have a TGT. And this basically allows you to access the server. It goes TGT, then TGS ticket. Finally, the ticket granting service ticket. It's a portion of the KDC which handles issuing the TGS ticket granting service tickets to clients. It verifies a user's identity and their authorizations to access a given service. If no authorization or authentication can be made, no TGS ticket will return. This basically just means that if you send your TGT to the domain controller in the form of a specific request to return a TGS ticket, if for whatever reason you don't have access, you're not authorized to access this resource, you won't get a TGS ticket. The only time you'll get a TGS ticket is when you are authorized to access a given resource or machine. So access a given service after a TGT ticket has been received by the user, a TGS-REQ request is made to the KDC to request for a TGS ticket. So a TGS-REQ request, as we've just said, this is the request that is then sent after the AS-REQ response is received with a copy of the TGT. Inside this request we have a few different things, which I'm going to go over now. So inside of it we have our TGT, our ticket granting ticket, which contains a copy of the session key. We also have another authenticator, which again is just a timestamp encrypted by the session key of the previous response. Now, that session key of the previous response is inside of the TGT. So the only way this can be decrypted is from the domain controller. The domain controller will get a copy of the previous session key, which isn't stored anywhere on this request. For someone to intercept this, there's no way for them to tamper with that authenticator without this request being sort of denied or dropped by the domain controller, because only the TGT knows the private key of the authenticator which it's been encrypted with. And something new that we have now as well in this request, we also have an SPN, which is a service principal name of a service which the user wants to access. I'm going to go over what SPNs are now after this. And once again, the TGT is encrypted via the KDC. There we go. Always the copies. I confused myself then. So the TGT is encrypted via the KDC secret key. As always, it's not changed. So TGS-REQ continuing. The request to receive a TGS ticket from the KDC. This is the next portion of the Kerberos lifecycle. Once we've got our TGT ticket, we're going to send a TGS-REQ request with the TGT ticket. Requires three things. We want to know the service to access, the SPN, the service principal name. We need a valid TGT ticket. Without that, we cannot return a TGS ticket. It's not how it works. And an authenticator. And this time it's different. Instead of it being encrypted with the user's secret key, it's now going to be encrypted with the session key from the previous request. And again, this session key from the previous request is stored in the TGT, which only the domain controller can access to prevent tampering. So a service principal name, or an SPN, is a unique identifier for a given service on a particular host. So SPNs, you can have multiple of the same service, such as MySQL, MS SQL, whatever it may be, CIFS, anything, HTTP. They are unique for a host. So you can have two HTTP hosts, but there'll be two separate service principal names. All a service principal name does is basically tie like an account to a service. So then, again, as I say, at Kerberos, it uses a centralized authentication system. So every service, every single functionality on the domain must authenticate to the domain controller. And how it does that is by service principal names. It gives the service like a username and a password, essentially. So, for example, a MySQL server running on a machine called Windows 02 could be similar to MySQL/Windows 02. That would be the service principal name of that machine running MySQL. And the common naming scheme for this is the service name /FQDN, the fully qualified domain name. And all services must be registered to the KDC, and each will receive their own unique service secret key. This is must become more apparent in a second once we start explaining the TGS tickets. But as I just briefly mentioned there, as Kerberos is a centralized system, everything on it is going to be authenticated to the KDC. Hence why all the data is going to be stored on there.
So just really quick before we continue, in post-processing as I'm editing this video, I've just realised I've not covered quite an important part of this. I'm not going to go into it into great detail, but it is worth mentioning, and I thought I'd covered it later on in the slides, but I had not. So in the TGT, this block of data, just called ticket data, does have a name. I'm going to go over that now. I'm going to go over what's in it and basically what it does. So the ticket granting ticket contains a thing called a pack. This is the encrypted ticket data here that's encrypted by the KDC's secret key. It's known as the Privileged Attribute Certificate, and this basically stores all of the information about a user, so their rights, their groups, identity information, their authorization information, what services they can access, what services they can't, things of that nature. And it basically exists so Kerberos can authenticate a user via the ticket that they have got, the TGT ticket, so they don't have to keep querying the DC for the information, otherwise this would be a very long-winded process and incredibly inefficient, whereas tickets exist to make this process nice and streamlined, keep it stateless, and make everything work.
So as we previously explained, we will send a TGS-REQ request to the KDC, and that is going to request our TGS ticket, the ticket granting service ticket. If everything goes well and everything can be decrypted and everything's valid, it will send back a TGS-REQ response. So the KDC receives the TGT from the TGS-REQ request. In order to verify that request made is valid, the authenticator must be decrypted without failure. Session key stored in the TGT encrypted by the KDC is decrypted by the KDC, and the encrypted authenticator sent with the TGS-REQ request is decrypted using the key stored in the TGT. If all goes well, a TGS-REQ response is sent back, and the TGS ticket is encrypted using the service key. So as explained before, the service principal name, the reason this exists is so these services can encrypt the TGS ticket with their key. Obviously, that's not the only reason, but that's why it's utilised, I guess. The session key is again encrypted using the user key, and then it will also be stored in the next request on the TGT. Again, this process just repeats. So the TGS-REQ in form of a diagram. So the response from this in our TGS rep response. Once we've got a TGS ticket, it will be a TGS ticket and a new session key. So as you can see, we have no TGS anymore. This is just the TGS ticket that we need to access the service. So the TGS ticket is encrypted with the service private key. And inside this TGS ticket, there's a copy of TGT data. It's not the full TGT. It's just the important information from within the TGT. So what the user can access, the things that it can do, things like that. A new copy of the session key created and the service principal name, the service you want to access. And the newly generated session key for future verifications encrypted via the user key. And the new session key, this new key here, is also copied inside TGS ticket to be decrypted via the service, just to ensure validity on the services side as well. So accessing services, this is done via an application request, an AP request. So TGS rep response receiver TGS ticket. Sorry, there is a spelling mistake there. It should be TGS rep, not TGS rep. The user decrypts the response to reveal the session key, encrypted via the user key, and a TGS ticket encrypted via the service's secret key. It sends up the authenticator along with the new TGS ticket to the service wishing to be accessed. The authenticator, to ensure validity of requests, is encrypted using the newly created session key from the TGS rep response. So this is basically just a rinse and repeat of what's happened before. We've basically been encrypting and decrypting session keys using the service key, a user's key, and then we'll be using a service key, or the KDC's key, things like that. It's basically just a rinse and repeat. We're doing it again, but this time we're doing it when we're accessing a service. So the application request. There we go. The AP request, it will send a TGS ticket and it will send an authenticator. So this time, the timestamp is encrypted using the session key from the last request, and as already explained, the session key from the last request is stored inside the TGS ticket. So the only way that's going to be decrypted is by the the service. So if this is tampered with in any way during transit or something's gone wrong, it's not going to be able to decrypt it, and it's going to be invalidated that way. So accessing the service, the application request AP. The service receives the AP application request with the TGS ticket inside, and the authenticator encrypted via the session key and stored inside the TGS ticket. Providing the authenticator can be decrypted correctly and validated, and the TGS ticket can be decrypted and user correctly authenticated by the service, the user will receive access to the given service. So basically what the spiel just means, if the authenticator is decrypted successfully, as in for whatever reason, maybe the time's incorrect, or if the request has been tampered with, it's not be able to decrypt it because the secret key is stored inside the TGS ticket, which is encrypted by the service key. However it may be, as long as all that's okay, then the user will be given access to the service. And if it's authenticated the service will respond to the user with an AS-REQ response, allowing the client to verify the responses from the service and start issuing requests. And it's at this point where everything's sort of gone okay, and you can sort of operate, access the request service as normal. And this is where it becomes without credentials. This fluid process then, providing there's no sort of within a certain time frame, you're not going to be asked for your credentials. Things like that, so it limits the use of credentials over the network. So just to reiterate some key concepts for Kerberos Authentication, it's a stateless protocol, minimal data is stored in the KDC, only secret keys. So that's why the session keys exist, to keep track of sessions and also to ensure another way to ensure request validity. Time-based authentication, tickets are stored on the client. And the service machines are all time-based, so time-sensitive. It allows the authentication to remain stateless, so nothing's stored in the KDC. If any of these tickets run out of their lifetime, it'll be shown as the timestamp on the ticket will not be valid. It'll exceed or be too short, things like that. It uses timestamp authenticators to ensure message validity, and authentication occurs on the service, not the KDC. So when you want to access a given service, the KDC don't really have a role in it. It just sort of provides the information. The actual authentication itself is on the service machine. It's not on the domain controller. It's at a service level. So we're going to go over a little simple diagram here, and we'll go over it a bit more after this as well, just to explain some things that might have sort of been brushed over, but as a general sort of high level, very high level thing here. So as a user, when we want to access a request or access a service, we will send a request to the domain controller, and we're going to be requesting our ticket granting ticket. At this point, we're just sending our username and password. If we can be authenticated and our username and password combination is correct, the domain controller is going to return to us a copy of a TGT ticket. So at that point, we're like, oh, I want to access a service. So we will send our ticket granting ticket back to the domain controller. This time we'll say, oh, we want a ticket granting service ticket, and this is to access a given service. The service isn't going to speak to us without a TGS ticket. All going well, the KDC will respond with a TGS ticket. So at this point, the KDC said, oh well, we've been authorized to access a service. Here's a given ticket to access the service. And then we will send the TGS ticket to the service, where we're then authenticated for a second time. And we should, all going well, be able to access that given service.
So in this next section, we're going to be going over the basic attacks that exist in Kerberos. Some of these are out of scope for the OSCP and more CRTP focused, but like anything, you can never have too good of an understanding of something. There's always things to learn, and if you understand things a lot better, especially out of scope for what you're going to be doing, in general, I think it's going to serve you well, especially if you do want to go into pen testing as a career, not just complete the OSCP exam for whatever reason. This is really going to help you with that. It's going to introduce you to a lot of the basic concepts and a lot of the attacks that are going to follow you through your career as well. So it is going to tell you which attacks are in scope for the OSCP, which are not. For instance, there's going to be something called delegation attacks. They're completely out of scope to the OSCP, as far as I'm aware. There's nothing on the exam material. I don't believe there's any exam machines that will have them in. It's not necessarily too advanced, the OSCP, it's just not covered. So it's just not in there. We're going to go over that. That's more CRTP focused. Some other attacks, such as roasting attacks and ticket-based attacks, we're all going over which ones affect which course, and ways in which you can exploit them. Now, in this video, we're not going to be going over the know-how and how to actually complete each one of these attacks. I'm just going to be demonstrating them to you and a very basic understanding of how you might go ahead and do them. These videos are coming out after this, so once you see, as you see in this video, if you keep around the next few days, there will also be videos out for how to perform these attacks in an Active Directory environment. As well as that, there'll also be a video coming out on the basics of Active Directory, which is slightly different to this. It's going to cover the basic fundamentals such as trusts and your other components which make up an AD set. Despite being a very secure protocol, configurations by design can make a system implemented in Kerberos weaker based on a variety of factors. So Kerberos is a very secure protocol. There's nothing inherently weak about it. There's just a few things that do exist, especially in an Active Directory environment, that do make it a lot more vulnerable if misconfigured. So these primary attack vectors that you'll probably see are ticket-based attacks, roasting attacks, and delegation attacks. And these are what you'll be covering on your CRTP and or your OSCP. So right away, we'll go into the roasting attacks. So it says there, I don't know why the name exists. I've tried to Google it, I just can't find anything as to why it's called that. It's probably very simple, I just can't figure it out. But what it involves is retrieving some sort of hash that's encrypted via a secret key from the domain controller or a user. And then all you're going to do is crack this password offline. Generally, how to get this hash is actually quite simple. And the way in which you'll go about doing it is nothing remotely complex about it. This is why it's so unbelievably easy. If once you've compromised a domain environment, if these configurations are correct, it can lead to a lot of downfall, especially if weak passwords do exist. A lot of these attacks can be mitigated, especially even if you've got a misconfiguration, like as we're going to discuss now at Kerberoasting or AS-REQ roasting. If you have a weak password, you can mitigate this attack if you absolutely need to have these implemented for whatever reason and it causes this attack vector to exist. Have an extremely secure password and it sort of mitigates this attack to an extent. So we'll start off with AS-REQ roasting. So as we explained before, the AS-REQ response contains a encrypted part that is encrypted with a user's secret key, meaning that if we were to decrypt that, we would know the user's secret key, so hence we can take it offline and crack it. So it can also be named AS-REQ roasting or a pre-authentication attack, and the reason why it's called a pre-authentication attack is because it exists when pre-authentication is disabled for a domain or for an account level basis. So it says there, it relies on pre-authentication being disabled either globally or via an account-to-account basis. Both will achieve the same result. When pre-authentication is disabled, no authentication has to be made. Only a valid username presented to the KDC, which will return an AS-REQ response. This response contains a session key encrypted via the user's secret key. This can then be offline decrypted to reveal the plaintext password. So, as I just explained a little bit there, alluded to, in this AS-REQ response, you have an encrypted portion. Usually, this AS-REQ response is only sent back once authentication has been made, so a valid username and a valid password combination. If you disable this pre-authentication, it returns an AS-REQ response with just a valid username. So all that means is, if you were to send a valid username to a KDC, even if you know nothing about the domain, no credentials, you would receive a encrypted password hash back, which can then be decrypted offline. This is the only type of attack which requires absolutely zero authentication, hence why it is so powerful. So if you can simply just see an Active Directory environment and there are accounts on there which have pre-authentication disabled, if you were to somehow figure them out or fuzz the domain, so a password, spray attack with usernames, whatever you want to call it, if you were to just send these usernames to the domain controller query information, if you were to able to figure out which one of these has pre-authentication disabled, which is incredibly easy to do and incredibly quick, you would receive a password hash returned, which you can then crack offline. So AS-REQ roasting, when to perform? Perform whenever a new valid username has been found. If you haven't got access to a domain, or even if you do have access, it's always worth checking. If you have Bloodhound, tools like that, not covered in this course, but it's basically a GUI-based, very powerful tool that basically lays out and maps out attack chains in the form of a graph database in front of you. So it's very easy to spot ways forward, and it just makes things infinitely easy to see and visualize. So personally, I'd perform whenever a new valid username has been found. I wouldn't spam this. It would be very loud if you just send a list of usernames to the DC. So if you do find like a team list for an organization, make a word list out of these names and whatever naming convention that you think. Send that to the domain and see if any of them have pre-authentication disabled. Perform if initially looking for access and potential usernames have been found. If you absolutely know the naming convention, you can find some users. By all means, go ahead. It might return something. And as a red teamer, consider modifying accounts to be AS-REQ roastable rather than a password spraying. So what this means is, if you've got access to an account or you have generic write privileges over an account, instead of changing the account's password, which is going to spot up and log very quickly, why don't you change the account so then you can get the password hash offline and crack it, and you can log in with just like a valid request. You're not going to be trying to lock the account out, things like that. As well, this also is good for persistence. If the password is changed, you always have access to that hash, which you can then potentially crack offline. These attacks will be covered more in the specific videos which are coming out after this in the coming days. I suspect when this video is uploaded, I suspect within the next 7 days, you will be seeing the videos related to this, because this is not going to get uploaded until these videos have been fully completed. So just stick around for them. I'll put links in the description. They might be on private, but I'll make sure that they are there. And if not, there'll be a pop-up now on screen for each one of these attacks that I'll be covering in here. So, AS-REQ roasting, how to perform Windows. As I've just explained, we're not going to be going mega into detail here how to do it, but this is sort of how you would go about doing it. If we're using PowerView, what we're doing there is we're looking for a domain user that has not got pre-auth. So that's basically, if we're already inside the domain, we can use PowerView and basically query get domain user, UAC filter, don't require pre-auth. That property, if it's set for a user, we know that they then have pre-authentication disabled. And then we can use something like Ruby or Rubius. We're just doing the same thing with PowerView. This is just an enumeration. Again, there at the bottom, in the bottom right, this is basically setting an account to then be AS-REQ roastable. Sorry about that. Phone is not on silent. That bottom right part there is setting an account to be AS-REQ roastable. So as I mentioned there, as part of like a red teaming thing, if you've got sort of generic all privileges over an account and you want to be a bit quieter, set the account to be AS-REQ roastable and then crack the password offline. It's better than doing a password spray attack if you absolutely must get into it for whatever reason. How to perform on Linux, you can use the in-packet toolkit, get npusers.py. that get non-pre-auth users. Used to fetch domain users which do not require Kerberos pre-authentication set on their accounts. So when you look at account properties, like a GUI on the Active Directory environment, it'll have that property on there. It's just a little tick box. Do not require Kerberos pre-authentication. If that is enabled, an account is then able to be AS-REQ roasted. And you would use the -request parameter to return the hashes to these accounts. Otherwise, Impact it just returns vulnerable account names. If you use the request parameter, it will then return the password hash back to you in the console. Secondly, we now have Kerberoasting. So this is very similar to AS-REQ roasting, where it would just exist on user accounts. Kerberoasting targets machine accounts, like service accounts, and this does require authentication. So you have to be in the domain for this attack to work. So this uses the TGS rep response to access the TGS ticket present inside the response, which is encrypted using the service's private key, allowing it to be offline correct. So when you receive a TGS ticket, inside that there is a secret portion which is encrypted using the service's secret key. Only the service can decrypt that, and that is for basically seeing what services can be accessed on the service. So as we know, the authentication exists on the service end, not the domain controller, and that is why that exists. And it is the process of cracking a service account's password. This is what this attack is for. And services in Active Directory use a thing called SPNs, service principal names, as an alias for a given service. And actual service accounts use this functionality to improve account security, such as time rotating passwords. In practice, if a user account has an SPN attached to them, this is something you want to look out for. A service account, which will use randomly generated passwords, will be incredibly complex and very long, generally about 100 to 120 characters, I believe, by default. They'll set them to, and they'll rotate, if needs be. When it's a user account, human error comes in. You could have a weak password, or there's different factors which could basically make that password infinitely weaker to a password cracking attack. This is where this attack generally wants to be used when a user account has an SPN attached to them, because then you know they're a service account and we can potentially crack the password offline. So SPNs can be present on user accounts, making this attack more viable, as this means the password is user generated, making them much weaker than securely generated system passwords, as I've just mentioned there. And this attack relies on poor configuration, such as weak service account passwords or user accounts with SPNs attached. Either of those will result in a successful attack. If your service account, for whatever reason, has a 3-letter password, it's just not good enough. Same with user accounts. Generally, they've got weaker passwords in place and making the passwords more viable for offline attacks. And it is generally more beneficial, as service accounts by default will typically have greater privileges than regular users. Basic concept, obviously services require certain things to work, users generally don't, hence why they typically have greater privileges. So Kerberoasting, when to actually perform. You will perform whenever valid credentials are found for domain. It's a very quick check just to see what services are available. And if you see a service account that's accessible to you, and always check if you're in a new domain and new trust, things like that, potentially to see if other service accounts are then visible. And perform locally via the foothold or remotely using tools such as Impact or Bloodhound. Bloodhound will tell you all these, and you can also do this remotely from a Linux system using Impact or other tools as well. And service accounts tend to yield great results due to the privileges they typically possess, as we've just mentioned. So Kerberoasting, how to perform on Windows. Again, we're going to use PowerView. We're going to Kerberos accounts with that command there, invoke Kerberos. Or we can use Rubius, and this will basically return back all the service accounts and their password hashes, which are Kerberoastable. How to perform on Linux. Get user spns.py, and this is basically finding any user accounts with SPNs attached. This is going to give you the best chance at cracking them offline. So in this section, we're going to be discussing ticket attacks. So obviously tickets are the sort of baseline, fundamental, core bit of Kerberos that allow everything to interact and work as it should. They store user credentials and which services a user can and will have access to. So there are a variety of ticket attacks that do exist. So not so much an attack, but how it is an attack, but how you basically utilize these tickets. So pass ticket, golden ticket, silver ticket, diamond ticket, and sapphire tickets all involve some sort of ticket modification, and we're going to go over them now. As it says there, the attacks can utilize forging, impersonation, and ticket modification. We're going to be covering gold and silver and diamond. We're not going to be covering the sapphire ticket, but I'll briefly go over that now. It's basically where parts of the ticket come together. So it's probably a bit easier to explain this after I've already explained it, but I'm going to go over it because I'm not explaining it now. It's pretty much where a valid TGT is replaced out of one ticket and it goes into another valid ticket. So in a diamond ticket attack, you will be decrypting and re-encrypting a valid ticket. The TGT is not being replaced. In a sapphire ticket attack, you will take two tickets. One of them will utilize the pack from another TGT, and you'll inject that into the other ticket, so you can move laterally that way. Yeah, I'm not explaining that one. It's a bit more complex and a bit over both of these courses. Let's go right into it. Probably in this goes in order, by the way. So in which order I cover them. So I'll be covering silver, golden, and diamond. Basically, just sort of the likelihood of which you're going to go up in the domain. So you can probably do a silver ticket attack, and then by the time you've reached domain admin, you can do a golden attack, and same you can do a diamond ticket attack. Things like that. It's basically just the food chain and the order in which how things go. So this impacts service accounts, and it basically just forges a TGS ticket to authenticate as a user to a given service. And this requires four things: a domain SID, a service account password hash, an SPN, a target host, and a target user. So the domain SID, the security identifier, is just part that basically says what you can access within a domain, and it's unique to. Well, the domain SID's not unique. It forms up part of the RID for any object in the domain. So the last four digits of your RID will be your relative identifier. I don't know how many characters it is, but before that will be your domain SID, the security identifier of the domain. And it says there, impact service accounts. So in this attack, you will essentially, when you gained access to a machine, for whatever reason you've got a service account password, if you perform Kerberoasting or you just found it in a file somewhere, you then try out this kind of attack to see if you can move laterally on another account. So silver tickets are more stealthy compared to golden tickets. As TGS tickets are authenticated on the service machine, nothing comes back to the DC. We'll go over golden tickets in a minute and you'll understand that a bit more. But basically, if it's not on the DC, it's a bit harder for things to get logged, essentially. User accounts and SPN attacks should be highly scrutinized due to weaker private keys and potential for an attack vector, as I've already mentioned in Kerberoasting. A forged TGS ticket is created using the service's private key to then send to a service and authenticate to it as a specified user. The pack, privilege attribute certificate, is copied from a valid TGT inside a TGS ticket, which contains a user identity encrypted via a service's private key. So when you would perform a silver ticket, when a service private key or hash is known or found, and after Kerberoasting. So if you perform a Kerberoasting attack and you've got hold of a service's key, by all means, perform a silver ticket attack. You can then authenticate as your user or another user to that service and potentially move laterally that way. So silver ticket, higher performing windows. You collect the required information, the domain SID, the service account hash, password, etc. And then you can use Mimikatz, you can also use Rubius. There's plenty of utilities to do this. There's like 3 or 4, well, there's plenty of ways to do it. I'm not going to be showing all of them, but just as an example, the Mimikatz golden utility allows you to mint tickets. It's the same for diamond, golden, and silver tickets, and I believe it does others as well. But this will just allow you to mint the ticket using the same context. Loads of things you can do. I'm only going to show this once, and I'm not going to be going over it in this video, hence why I'm just going to do it once. But in the videos that will be covering these attacks, I'm going to show you specifically how to do it and different tools how to do it as well. So please go check them out. But as you can see here, the Kerberos Golden, we mint the ticket. We need the domain, the name of the domain we're going to use, the user we want to impersonate. So for instance, we can authenticate to a service as an administrator, why would we not? Domain SID, the RC4, this can be any hash, so AES or the NTLM hash of the account, and the target, the machine to attack, so the host name of the machine, and the service you want to go for, like CIFS or LDAP, things like that. And the /BTT parameter stands for pass ticket. Briefly cover that at the end, but it's basically just how these attacks actually work and basically different ways you can do it. And how to perform on Linux. On Linux, you've got a ticket of PY. I believe that is part of Impacket, and the separate videos will be covering all these attacks covered in this video, as I've already mentioned. So now we're on to the golden ticket attack. This type of attack allows you to a full domain compromise, and it's a good persistence method. And this is only available when the password hash, the KRB TGT account is known. And this account is the KDC's automatically generated account with a randomized password, as we should already know up until this point. Again, requires 4 things: domain SID, the KRB TGT account hash, the domain name, and the user we want to access. There was a few things that have changed with these golden ticket attacks. So I believe you used to be able to use users that just completely didn't exist. Now I'm almost certain that is not the case. There's a patch made, so now the user must exist in the domain, whereas before you could just create a completely random username that didn't have to exist, and it would be authenticated. But I believe that is not the case. Golden ticket attacks continued. So they're less stealthy compared to silver tickets, as golden tickets are authorized via the KDC, so logs will be made. Logs not available to the KDC directly on it are obviously not going to be likely to be seen, or make it a bit more difficult unless they've got some sort of system which checks all machines, which more than likely they will have. But again, if anything's going back to the domain controller, it's going to be more widely available. But generally, they're less stealthy compared to silver ticket attacks. Depending on the execution, it could be more obvious as well. So, for instance, a default ticket lifetime, I believe, is 600 minutes. By default, in Mimikatz, I think it's like 10 years. Obviously, if an EDR or some sort of system on the machine spots that, it's going to immediately know that something's wrong. Mimikatz is probably going to assume it's Mimikatz. Well, it's just basically going to be a massive flag to any sort of system monitoring the machine. As well with these attacks, if you are performing a golden ticket attack on a user, for instance, let's say you do it on your user, and the EDR or the system's going to know that you're not part of the domain systems group or domain administrators group, it's going to check that as well. There are ways in which that will check for that, so that's another way for it to be detected. They'll basically decrypt the ticket information in the pack and see if it's all valid, and obviously if it's not, then going to know that way. Really good for persistence, as using this technique, a golden ticket can be created for any user and can be difficult to detect if not monitoring or looking for this type of attack. Again, generally in most domain or enterprise systems, you'd like to think that they are going to be looking for this attack, but like anything, there's more than one way to approach it, and various different ways you can go about mitigating the detection vectors for this. So when to perform the golden ticket attack, when a valid KRB TGT hash is known and full DC has been compromised, you can then probably move from that domain to another domain potentially. You can just crawl about whatever domain you're in, and yeah, just go mad, and then potentially go across into other domains and go into an enterprise level. I'm not covering that in this, but obviously that's what could be done with this attack. If other machine's not compromised and can be reached, so now when you've obviously got a golden ticket, you can go anywhere on the domain. Or persistence, if you want to leave and come back, or just to basically allow yourself that potential, a bit like an SSH key, if you will, is how I remembered it. Once you've got that golden ticket, if it's like a 10-year lifetime, if you can get away with it and it's not been detected, you'll always be available to log into these services using this golden ticket. Finally, the diamond ticket attack, and this involves decrypting and encrypting a previously obtained valid TGT. So unlike these other two attacks, which completely rely on forged tickets, though, so there's no other previous requests made to any different services, things like that. It's just creating these tickets from scratch. This time, we're basically going to take a valid TGT, and then we're going to take another valid TGT, and we're going to extract the pack from one of them, and we're going to put it into another valid ticket, so we can potentially move laterally that way. It's only possible once the KRB TGT hash is known, a bit like a golden ticket, because obviously we've got to modify the pack data, and it's more stealth than a golden ticket attack, as a valid TGT request exists for this ticket, whereas a golden ticket is completely forged, no requests were ever made. So obviously if some system's monitoring like where a ticket came from, this ticket would most likely get through, because obviously it knows that request has been made. Whereas a golden ticket, it doesn't know where it came from, doesn't know they exist. Certain factors aren't going to exist for it, and certain IDs obviously aren't going to be there, certain artifacts. And then finally, how all these attacks culminate together to be exploited. Generally, you can use sort of a pass the ticket attack, and this is basically how the forged and stolen tickets are utilized for lateral movement. So tickets can be exported and saved for later usage in the form of a Kirby file, so you can basically store all your ticket information and use it if it's got a long enough lifespan, as long as your ticket doesn't expire within that time, and then you can then use that ticket as you wish. Or it can also be injected directly into memory and using the current context of lateral movement. So as we saw as part of the Mimikatz here, the /PTT, this will immediately inject this into the context of wherever you're running, and you'll be available to access resources as that user from that. And the same for Rubius and other tools that will perform this type of attack as well. And all tools that, well, all sort of big tools like Rubius, Mimikatz, There's one more. I can't remember the name. We'll use Packet for an example. You can also always export these tickets and save them for later usage as well.
Right, so in this next part, we're going to be going over delegation attacks. As it says at the bottom there, this is out of scope for the OSCP. You're not going to be doing any of these attacks. However, I'd highly recommend you still watch the video. It'll give you a nice introduction to these, so you've got a familiarity with them. If you're doing CRTP, this is necessary, this is crucial for you. Or if you want to do CRTP, you will need to learn these. As I've already stated a few times throughout this video, we'll not be going over specifically how to perform these attacks. I'll be briefly covering it, but I'm not going to be going in depth. These will all have their own separate videos coming out in the coming days after this one has been released, so please keep out for them. They'll pop up on screen now if they're available. If not, they'll be in the description, but they will be coming out shortly after this one, no later than a week. So, Kerberos Delegation, what is it? It allows services to authenticate as users to other services as the previously authenticated user. Basically, as it sounds, when you delegate something, you give something to something, or typically delegation refers to like privileges being handed down. So, for instance, a web service which must access a backend database, a user authenticates to the web service, and then the web service will authenticate to the backend database service as that user. Something like that sort of setup. And delegation can also be configured for user accounts and machines. So, delegation is not something that just occurs for a service. It can also go for user accounts. So, certain machines can be told they can't delegate, just like certain users can be told they can't delegate, just prevent lateral movement like this. So for instance, you might say, oh, you cannot delegate as an administrator for obvious reasons. It's obviously going to create quite a lot of security issues. There are three main types in Kerberos or an Active Directory. You get constrained, unconstrained, and resource-based constrained delegation, I should say after that. I'm going to go over those three types now. So right off the bat, in order of complexity, we have sort of the lowest level, unconstrained delegation, which is also probably the worst. It's the easiest to exploit, and it's the one that's just probably going to get the most from. So a given service may authenticate to any other service as a given user, and it requires trust this computer for delegation to any service. Kerberos only to be set in the properties for a machine. And it is an extremely dangerous permission to set. So this basically means you can authenticate to any service. As it sounds, unconstrained. There's no limits on it. You can delegate from any service to another as a user. And the DC places the user ticket granting ticket sent inside of the TGS request to a service. I've misspelled that. The ticket granting ticket is extracted and stored in LSAS for future usage to authenticate the user to the other service. So with delegation, all these tickets are stored in LSAS. So if you get admin access to a machine, potentially you can move right up to domain administrator. If a domain admin connects to a machine you can delegate from, because you can dump their ticket straight from LSAS. Something to be aware of. A nice little diagram just to make it a bit easy to understand. So as the user here, when they want to access a service, or go to a web service, whatever, unconstrained delegation, this service can authenticate to any of the services of the user. As you can see, straight to production environment, backend database, a file server. There's no limit on it. The user can go straight from that service. The web service can go straight from itself as that user to any other service. There is no predefined list. It's just told it can do what it wants. It can go to any other service. The next step up from this is constrained delegation. This places limits on what a machine can delegate, or machine or user can delegate to, and who they can delegate from, things like that. So the service may authenticate to a specific list of other services, not just any service. This is for obvious reasons to lock it down and make it more secure. And it also uses two extensions to do this. So it uses the S4U, the service for user extension, and this provides two extensions on how you can authenticate to a given service. The service for user to self and the service for user to proxy. These exist for two different reasons, which I'm now going to go over now. Real quick before we do that, as you can see in this diagram, constrained delegation, this time we can only access SQL. We cannot access the file server or the production environment. As in our list, we've been told we cannot access those, and we can only access one service, which in this case happens to be our SQL server. So as mentioned, the service for user to self extension. This is basically for when a user authenticates to a service via non-Kerberos means. So if a user uses like NTLM authentication or like Windows auth to log into a machine, this will be used. If not, a ticket will already be present. So a service will obtain a forwardable TGS ticket to itself on behalf of a user. This is, as I said, this is for when the TGS ticket is not already present from a user accessing the service. Obviously, if they go in through Windows Auth, that's not going to be the case. They've not authenticated through Kerberos. And it's just the user principal name that is required. No password is needed. The service will send a request to the KDC basically saying, oh, from this user principal name like John, we need a affordable TGS ticket for. And then the DC will check service must have trusted to authenticate for delegating attribute set. It'll check for that, and it'll also check that the user the service is requesting for can actually be delegated from to, things like that. Finally, the service for user to proxy, and this service obtains a separate TGS ticket to another service on behalf of the user. This is the second part of it. So if we go back to this diagram, as the user interacts in the service, this is where the S4U to self will occur. If the user is not authenticated through Kerberos, this is basically the service getting a TGS ticket for that to then request a second one. And then service for user to proxy, when the web service actually wants to use that ticket and go to another service, this is where the S4U to proxy will be used when it wants to access the SQL01 server. So a list of services can be delegated to and are defined in the MSDS allowed to delegate to attribute. And this contains a list of SPNs that the service can obtain TGS tickets for. So obviously service principal names, which basically defines basically just a service. It's like a specific thing in Kerberos. The name has an account attached to it. It's how it defines what services are what. And in this case, the list basically defines what services we can access to. Finally, coming together, constrained delegation, how it actually all works. So right at the front, the service obtains affordable TGS ticket via S4U to self as the user is authenticated via NTLM. As I've just explained, if they authenticate via Kerberos, they've come in just as they would, they've logged in through the domain, and they've not, it won't have to do this basically. But if they've not done that, if they've authenticated through Windows Auth or whatever means, it will have to get a TGS ticket, to then further request another ticket for another service. The KDC checks the service trusted to authenticate for delegation attribute is set and to ensure that the service can actually delegate and that user account being requested isn't blocked for delegation for whatever reason. For instance, you don't want to be giving out administrators, as I've already mentioned, or some sort of high priority user. The forwardable TGS tickets are then returned from the KDC back to the service, and the ticket previously returned, the forwardable ticket, is sent back to the KDC in the next request by the service, and the service ticket for another service is requested on behalf of the user using their previous TGS ticket. As it says here, using the forwardable TGS ticket, that might be its forwardable ticket, or it could be the TGS ticket obtained from when it's logged in through Kerberos. It doesn't have to be through the S4U2 self functionality as previously explained. The KDC checks MSDS allows delegate to property that the service requested is listed on there. If it's not, it'll deny the request and say can't access that. And if it is valid, a valid TGS ticket is returned, and now the service can authenticate to the other service as that user. That is the S4U to proxy, the service for user to proxy part of that authentication. To abuse access to the service, a service account is needed, so you'll need control over the actual account you want to, like the service machine. And any service listed in that property can be accessed if we compromise the service machine. As I've already said, I'm not going over it in this video. These are separate videos. You all need their own separate videos, especially the next one. It's a little bit more complex. But these will all have their own separate videos and examples and how you can exploit them. They'll all be coming out. Check the description. I'll put a pop-up here. This is coming twice. Nice. Finally, resource-based constrained delegation. This is where instead, typically in an Active Directory environment or domain environment, the delegation principles are controlled by domain administrators. This delegates the delegation properties to the actual resource or service itself. So it says there, the delegation authority is now the responsibility of the service or the resource. Typically, other delegation types are controlled by domain administrators. So there's a particular attribute that is only given to domain administrators by default in Active Directory. So in this case, a domain's got a configuration where those principles have been delegated. So a service can configure its own delegation rights, and a service admin can configure delegation properties, not to be confused with domain admin. The service principal names are no longer listed on the allowed to delegate property, and they are also now in the allowed to act on behalf of the other identity property. Same thing, it's just in a different storage space. So any user with right privileges over this new property or the object as a whole, the allowed to act on behalf of other identity attribute or the service object can modify the services listed and access greater or greater services or other machines, basically. You must have control over an object with a service principal name attached, whether that be you've already got control of a machine, or you have the ability to join a fake service machine to the domain, or you've got admin access to an already joined machine. And basically what we can do is by setting resource-based constrained delegation over a machine, we're allowing ourselves to authenticate to that machine as any user we please, as long as the user we specify is actually allowed to delegate on that machine. This is why this one's so powerful, because obviously it's lesser privilege. You've granted a high privilege action to a lesser privileged user, and this is where potentially in a less secure way, and this is where the problems can occur if it's misconfigured. So a little bit of explanation. I'm not going to go too deep on it here, but just to show a little example. We've got control over a sales 01 machine, and we can modify the object attributes enabled by resource-based constrained delegation. We don't have full admin access to this machine. We've just basically, some user we've compromised has got access over this object in the domain. However, we do have full admin access over a sales 02 machine, where we can delegate from as a user we've compromised. We've dumped his credentials and we can log into the other machine as that user, but we want to escalate to a local administrator. So with this PowerShell script here, what we're going to do is we're basically going to specify the computers that we wish to delegate from. We've got full control of sales 02, so that's the machine we're going to go from. Using the Active Directory module, we're going to basically say, go to the computer sales 01. We've got control over the properties, so we're going to say the principal allowed to delegate to from this computer here. So we're enabling resource-based constrained delegation, and we're basically saying the computer we wish to delegate from is in this list here, in our case sales 02. Now we're going to use Rubius. I'm going to use the service for user proxy. We're going to specify the user that we want to authenticate as. So we've dumped credentials from the sales 02 machine. The user sales 01, probably should have said sales 02 there. That's the user we found. His password there. And we're going to be logging into this service here, the HTTP service on sales 01. We don't have access or admin access to this machine, but we're going to impersonate as the administrator, and we're going to inject that ticket back into this context. Once we've done that, all going well, we should be able to access straight to that machine via WinRM, as you can see there. I'm going to spawn an elevated command prompt as an administrative user. Finally, if you've made it this far, just a bit more relaxed now. Just thank you for watching. This video's been quite a long time in the making. I've been wanting to build it for a while, and it's unfortunate just finding the time. So I've got quite a busy schedule at the minute, a lot's going on. But I've got a bit of free time currently, so this has finally been finished up. Now on to the next set of videos, which is basically, I'm not actually fully set it up yet, but I've got a custom AD environment where I'm going to basically show these being exploited in my own local environment and how you can do that fully in depth and explain them a lot better. But just for the minute, I think this is a very good resource. I'm going to put in the description as well some of the good resources. There's another video, I've briefly watched it, but I know it's really long and it's very in depth on Kerberos. I think it's Kerberos for Dummies, or You Do Not Understand Kerberos, something along those lines. I'll also put that below in other resources that I've used for this video. Again, for people taking the CRTP, I'd highly recommend you watch the next set of videos, especially for the OSCP. These next set of videos are really going to help if you're taking that exam. You definitely want to wrap your head around the attacks that I cover. And again, in every video, I'll specify what's out of scope for the OSCP, what's in scope, things like that. In general, any sort of advanced directory attacks or active directory attacks such as delegation, things like that, probably not going to be in the exam, but it's good to know just in case they ever do come into the exam, or as I say, just for the future. Again, please like and subscribe and just comment to boost the algorithm. I had a lot of support for my latest OSCP video. Probably doubled my my subscribers and things like that in the last month since uploading. That's been really nice. So hopefully I get the same sort of response from these videos, and the algorithm picks it up, which should be really good. It'll allow me to give me a bit more time to put into this. Again, comment improvements. People obviously I speak a bit funny. I try to slow it down in this video, and I'll make a conscious effort to speak more clearer and reduce the amount that I'm stuttering, things like that. Yeah, any improvements or anything else you'd like to see, please do recommend. Finally, and I've mentioned it a lot. The next set of videos, please go and watch them. They'll all be covering the attacks mentioned in these videos and using common sort of toolkits that you're going to need, both as a red teamer and as for your exam, and just other cool topics as well. Well, thank you very much for watching.